Welcome. We're going to start our final session this afternoon. So once again, welcome, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We are now coming to our concluding session of this International Forum on One Korea here in Washington, D.C. as we've been addressing the theme Solutions to the Korean Peninsula Crisis. Here we will have some important voices and perspectives shared with us in a summative fashion, touching upon some of the larger themes, critical themes that we've been discussing here in our forum yesterday and today, and also a continuing discussion which will be carried further in the second portion of this forum in Seoul, Korea on December 7th and 8th. And so without further ado, I trust that all of you had a wonderful lunch. We're very honored to have with us an important delegation from the Republic of Korea, most notably with 6 members of the Korean National Assembly, 2 of whom will be addressing us here in this session. So thank you again to our National Assembly members for joining, as well as the important delegation from Action for Korea United. And so to move us along expeditiously, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the first speaker for this afternoon. The Honorable Chun-Woo Park is a member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea from the Korea Liberty Party. In his distinguished administrative career, he was first Vice Minister of Public Administration and Security, Vice and Mayor of the Daejeon Metropolitan City. He has also been member of the Land, Infrastructure, Transportation Committee and Special Committee on Improving Inter-Korea Relations. He currently serves as a member of the Special Committee on Budget and Accounts. Please join me in welcoming Honorable Park.
Thank you, James, for your generous introduction. And distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my great honor to have an opportunity to share my thoughts with you about the crisis of Korean Peninsula at the One Korea Forum here in Washington, D.C., which is the center of world politics. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the Global Peace Foundation, Action of Korea United, EastWest Institute, and the One Korea Foundation who organized this forum. As you are well aware, back in Korean War about 60 years ago, young people from 16 peace-loving countries, including United States, shed their valuable blood to defend the Republic of Korea. Thanks to their dedication and sacrifice and the cherished values of peace and freedom that they have protected, the Republic of Korea, arising from the ashes of the war, has created miracles by achieving industrialization and democratization at the same time through the rapid growth unprecedented in the world history, while enjoying peace and prosperity backed by the combined defense system of solid ROK U.S. alliance. We have now become the world's 10th largest economy and serve as a responsible member of global community for world peace and co-prosperity of humanity. However, the Korean Peninsula is now facing the most serious security crisis since the Korean War due to Kim Jong-un's reckless nuclear provocation. North Korea is threatening both South Korea and United States via its 6th nuclear test and intercontinental ballistic missile, while the ROK U.S. alliance is responding strongly to such provocation by saying that it is willing to impose military options. Military tension is on the rise as the U.S. nuclear-powered aircraft carrier fleet and the nuclear-powered submarines of the largest scale in history were deployed around the Korean Peninsula. Although the global community has put a lot of diplomatic effort into deterring North Korea nuclear development for the past 25 years, North Korea's nuclear missile provocation deteriorating day by day drove the Korean Peninsula to sit on a powder keg. If war broke out on the Korean Peninsula again, the Korean Peninsula would suffer tremendous devastation, which even cannot be compared with the Korean War in the past, and it would inevitably cause military conflict among neighboring powers such as US, China, Japan, and Russia, putting the whole of Northeast Asia into a spiral of war and resulting in the Third World War. Therefore, I believe we must prevent war on the Korean Peninsula. Under these circumstances, the global community has been putting in diplomatic efforts to stop North Korea's nuclear development, while at the same time strengthening pressures and sanctions through global cooperation. Unfortunately, however, such efforts have been in vain, and due to such a failure, the global community is now taking a stronger position than ever to strengthen the level of sanctions and pressures on North Korea through global cooperation. Experts believe that the success of global sanctions and pressures on North Korea depends on the cooperation of China and Russia. Despite the strong demand of Trump administration, China, the ally of North Korea, and that regards North Korea as a buffer for the US and Japan, is not likely to block the oil pipe, the lifeline of the North Korea. There are signs that North Korean economy is getting harder as China is actively participating in the UN sanction resolution against North Korea. Considering the unique characteristics of North Korean regime, the passive attitude and hidden assistance of China, however, it is unlikely that North Korea would surrender in a short time. North Korea's obsession and commitment to its nuclear program is far stronger than the global community think, and its economic dependence on foreign countries is so low, which enables North Korea to endure international sanctions much better than expected. The nuclear armament of North Korea is not means for diplomatic negotiations or domestic politics, but a part of a long-term national strategy, including the consideration of unification under communism by war, and is a strong driving force to maintain North Korean regime, all of which make it difficult to change its position. Former North Korean diplomat Tae Yong-ho rightly said, the goal of Chairman Kim Jong-un is signing peace treaty with United States and the withdrawal of US forces from the South Korea and the resultant collapse of South Korea. The unification of Korean Peninsula under communism via the nuclear missile development and anti-Americanism is the ruling ideology of the North Korea and basis for the Kim Jong-un regime. Therefore, North Korea could not easily abandon its nuclear missile development because they think the abandonment of nuclear development under global pressure leads to collapse of both Kim Jong-un and its regime. The global community seems to believe that if North Korean economy is seriously hurt by the strong global sanction and pressures, it will eventually come to the table of dialogue. Yes, if China and Russia actively participate in international cooperation, the dialogue would begin finally, though it will take some time. However, it is unthinkable for North Korea to abandon its nuclear program, the last resort of those who cannot compete with South Korea in terms of economic size and conventional military power. North Korea will try to earn time to advance and deploy its nuclear missiles for actual war through a brinkmanship tactic leaning on the force of China and Russia, as it did in the past six-party talks, to make a peace agreement with the US instead of freezing its nuclear missiles, abolish or minimize the ROK-US joint military drills, demand withdrawal of the US military from South Korea, and be guaranteed the large-scale economic support by the global community. Despite the U.S. military pressures, North Korea seems to believe that United States will not engage in war by even taking risk of confrontation with China and Russia. Based on such belief, North Korea will continue its provocation to raise tension to achieve its goals. North Korea's brinkmanship tactic works because only North Korea has nuclear weapons. The way to resolve North Korea's nuclear superiority is to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea to recover balance of terror. Once the tactical nuclear weapons are deployed to strike a nuclear balance on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea has no choice but to come to the negotiation table. Then, if we facilitate the denuclearization both on the South and North at the same time via the six-party talks, I believe this would be the most practical and effective way for now to ultimately denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. The tactical nuclear weapon sharing program with the US has already been implemented in the Western Europe countries, including Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and Turkey, and in line with the NPT spirit to prevent nuclear proliferation in the sense that nuclear development of each country could be curbed. Now, North Korea is utilizing its nuclear superiority to put pressures on South Korea and United States. Although South Korea has economic power 40 times stronger than that of North Korea and has stronger conventional military power, we can do nothing for the North nuclear provocation since we have no nuclear weapons. While the South Korean government still adheres to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the denuclearization has already been broken realistically, and it is time for South Korea to seek measures to save itself for its part. Depending on the situation of each country, positions to look at North Korea's nuclear program would be somewhat different, but every country opposed the nuclear proliferation to neighboring countries due to North Korea. If North Korea continue its nuclear development, however, we cannot unconditionally block the neighboring countries from developing nuclear weapons for the purpose of their defense. If US and China do not want the nuclear armament of South Korea, Japan, and other Asian countries, I believe we need to seriously consider the redeployment of US tactical nuclear weapons on Korean Peninsula in order to prevent nuclear domino effect in Northeast Asian region. The North Korean nuclear issue is not a problem only for the two Koreas. It is a matter of whether Northeast Asian region is in a direction to peace or war, and a matter of whether the humanity moves toward world peace and co-prosperity or war and annihilation. In order to maintain peace of the world as well as Northeast Asia, the cooperation of great powers around the Korean Peninsula and the global community are of utmost importance. I believe it is meaningful that global civil societies gather their forces to hold International Forum on One Korea under the theme of peace and unification on Korean Peninsula, both in Washington and Seoul, under such a cruel situation. Taking this opportunity, I should seek measures for co-security and peace on the Korean Peninsula and in the Northeast Asia region, which will be hit hardest by the North Korean nuclear program. We should also urge cooperation of relevant countries and actions of citizens of global civil societies in order to cope with the threats to all humanity caused by North Korea's nuclear provocation. In addition, I should appeal to the global community that peace and unification on Korean Peninsula is the one and only way to fundamentally resolve the North Korea nuclear problems, bring permanent peace to the world, and benefit all humanity and should create global consensus. I hope this forum could provide an opportunity for all members of the global community to recognize the importance of realizing peace and unification on the Korean Peninsula, and could mark a milestone for peace in Northeast Asia and in the world via global consensus. I once again would like to express my deepest gratitude to the organizers and the related officials of this forum for welcoming me and my colleagues with a warm heart in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Park. And you reminded us that the current circumstances have dire implications and requires a clear-eyed assessment of those circumstances that we face currently. Since this is a summative session of our discussions over the last 2 days, I'd also like to point out that what we have been discussing in the many sessions and speakers in the forum is that this very challenging circumstance currently is best addressed by focusing beyond the immediate and looking to the end goal of unification. And the premise that though serious steps must be taken, that there are channels and opportunities that can be explored and leveraged to solve the current crisis on the Korean Peninsula, short of an escalation or proliferation in the nuclear problem. So we thank you very much for your remarks, and I'd also like then to move to our next presenter, who is likewise a member of the Korean National Assembly. It's my pleasure to introduce Honorable Sang-min Lee. Honorable Lee is a 4-term member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea from the ruling Minjoo Party. He is a lawyer by profession and has served as co-president of the Korea Parliamentarians United Nations Millennium Development Goals Forum. In his distinguished political career, he has served as chairman of the Legislation and Judiciary Committee and also the Future Strategy, Science, and Technology Committee. He currently serves as a member of the Science, ICT, Broadcasting, and Communications Committee. For one technical point, Honorable Lee will speak in Korean, and there will be consecutive translation as he speaks provided here. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Sang-min Lee.
Good afternoon. 저는 대한민국 국회의원 이상민입니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am a member of the Korean National Assembly, Sang-min Lee.
주최 측에서 저보고 영어를 해주기를 강력히 요청을 했는데 제가 한국어로 해야겠습니다.
Well, organizers asked me to deliver my speech in English, but for my convenience, I'd like to deliver my message in Korean.
그 이유는 제가 영어를 못해서가 아니고 한국어를 더 잘하기 때문에 그렇습니다.
And that is not because I cannot deliver that in English, but because Korean being my mother tongue, I'm much more comfortable with that.
예, 오늘 여러분들 앞에서 한반도 통일을 비롯한 동북아 평화 그리고 번영을 위한 한국과 미국 사이의 협력에 관한 말씀을 드릴 수 있게 되어서 개인적으로 영광입니다.
It is actually my personal privilege to speak about strengthening of cooperation between the United States and Korea, and also for peace and security in Northeast Asia.
이번 2017 원코리아 국제 포럼을 함께 준비해 주신 글로벌 피스 재단 그리고 통일을 실천하는 여러분들 그리고 미국의 이스트웨스트 인스티튜트 관계자 여러분들께 깊이 감사드립니다.
Let me begin by extending my sincere gratitude to the organizers of this forum, Global Peace Foundation, Action for Korea United, EastWest Institute, and One Korea Foundation for organizing this international forum on One Korea 2017.
이곳 국제무역센터 이름이 미국의 40대 대통령이셨던 로널드 레이건 대통령의 이름과 같다고 들었습니다.
I understand this building, this very building, The International Trade Center was named after the 40th President of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
레이건 대통령께서 그 미국과 소련이 한참 그 냉전이 극심했던 1982년 자신의 모교 유레카대 연설에서 평화는 분쟁이 없는 상태가 아니고 분쟁을 평화로운 방법으로 다루는 능력을 의미한다. 그런 명언을 하셨습니다.
When the Cold War was waging between the United States and Soviet Union back in 1982, President Reagan made a speech at his alma mater, Eureka College, and said the following passage. Peace is not absence of conflict, but rather it is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means.
소련을 그 악의 제국이다라고 규정을 짓고 그 소련에 대해서 강경 기조를 보이면서도 악마하고도 대화해야 한다라면서 그 미하일 고르바초프 당시 소련 공산당 서기장과도 담판을 짓고 결국 역사적인 그 소련의 개방을 이끌어낸 바 있습니다.
And he's known for his hardline stance on the Soviet Union and also defined the Soviet Union as an evil empire. But at the same time, he had a negotiation with Mikhail Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union back then, and finally actually induced the Soviet Union towards openness by saying, we must talk with even the devil.
레이건 그 대통령께서 보여준 그 언동은 지금처럼 북한의 핵 문제로 한반도는 물론 세계의 평화 안보가 위협받는 상황에서 우리들에게 그 해법을 제시해주고 있다고 생각합니다.
I believe that his words and actions actually suggest to us how we should approach the problem in a situation where the peace and security of the world as well as the Korean Peninsula is being threatened by North Korea's nuclear development.
지나치게 과대한 긴장감을 높이거나 또는 군사적 충돌로 한반도를 둘러싼 동북아의 평화를 깨치지 않도록 우리 북핵 문제를 둘러싼 상황을 보다 평화적이고 안정적으로 관리하는 데 총집중해야 된다고 생각합니다.
That is, we should handle the situations surrounding North Korean nuclear problem in a stable manner so as not to raise tensions excessively or ruin peace in the whole world as well as Northeast Asia where the Korean Peninsula belongs through military collisions.
트럼프 미국 대통령께서 지난주 대한민국 국회를 방문해서 연설을 하셨습니다.
President Trump visited the National Assembly of Republic of Korea last week and delivered a speech.
매우 인상적이고 감명 깊었던 것은 그동안 북한을 향해서 강경한 태도를 보였던 트럼프 대통령이 당신은 김정은이죠. 하나님과 인간에 대해서 지은 범죄가 있음에도 불구하고 우리는 더 나은 미래를 위한 길을 제공할 준비가 돼 있다라고 연설을 하셨습니다.
Despite his harsh rhetoric towards North Korea, during his speech he said, despite every crime you means Kim Jong-un, you have committed against God and humanity, we are ready to offer, and we'll do that. We'll offer a path to a much better future.
한국인들에게는 그 많은 그 안도감과 감명을 주었습니다.
And many Koreans found it very impressive and actually they felt relieved to hear that from President Trump.
물론 북한의 도발을 억제하기 위해서 힘으로 제압할 필요성이 있다라는 트럼프 대통령의 뜻도 충분히 이해하고 존중합니다.
And certainly I fully understand and respect President Trump's intention that we also need to exercise strength to defeat North Korean provocation.
그러나 한반도에서의 무력 충돌 또는 전쟁은 동북아는 물론 세계의 대재앙이 될 것입니다.
But If there were to be another military conflict or war on the Korean Peninsula, that will be a disaster not only for the Korean Peninsula, but Northeast Asia and for the entire globe.
전쟁을 막고 평화를 지키기 위해서라도 한국과 미국은 더욱더 우정과 이해를 높이고 우정을 더 돈독하는 그런 노력을 해야 할 것입니다.
And in order to prevent such a disaster and maintain peace in the world, we must work to deepen our friendship and build trust, and also work together between the two countries.
미국은 우린 대한민국이 어려울 때 많은 지원을 해줬고 또 그 덕분으로 한국은 압축적으로 번영을 이뤄냈습니다.
The United States has been our closest friend and came to our aid whenever we were in trouble. And thanks to the United States, we are able to make a rapid growth.
앞으로 그 대한민국은 미국으로부터 받은 그 이상의 우정과 또 보답을 할 생각입니다.
And in the future, Korea stands ready to actually solidify our friendship and show our support than what has been received thus far from the United States.
한국과 미국의 끈끈한 동맹은 계속되어질 것입니다.
The solid cooperation and alliance between the two countries must continue.
대한민국은 한미 양국의 공동 번영은 물론 세계 인류 문명의 발전을 위해서 선도적 역할을 해낼 책무가 있음을 잘 알고 있습니다.
Republic of Korea is fully aware that not only the United States but also Korea needs to take a leadership role in maintaining co-prosperity between the two countries and also for the entire world.
문재인 대통령도 지난 9월 UN 총회에서 연설에서 북핵 문제를 근본적으로 해결하기 위해서는 UN 헌장이 말하는 안보 공동체의 기본 정신이 한반도와 동북아에서도 구현되어야 한다라고 밝힌 바 있습니다.
President Minjoo made a speech at the General Assembly of the United Nations back in September, and in his speech he said, in order to fundamentally resolve North Korean nuclear issue, the basic spirit of the security community set out in the UN Charter should be implemented on the Korean Peninsula as well as in Northeast Asia.
과거 냉전 시대의 프레임을 극복하고 한반도 통일 비전을 이뤄내고 또 상호 협력해서 공동 번영을 이뤄내기 위해서 한미 동맹에 더 굳건함이 필요하다고 생각됩니다.
I believe that the global community should agree on the unification vision of the Korean Peninsula beyond the frame of the Cold War and work together to achieve the unification on the Korean Peninsula, which is our ultimate goal.
한미 그 양국의 동맹은 그 한국 전쟁의 시련 속에서 싹텄고 갈수록 더욱더 강해져 왔습니다.
The ROK U.S. alliance was forged in the crucible of the Korean War and became only stronger over time.
한미 양국의 굳건한 그 동맹으로 인해서 중국과 일본, 러시아 등 동북아 국가들이 한 목소리로 또 북핵 문제를 해결하기 위해서 힘과 지혜를 모으면 한반도의 평화는 물론 통일까지 더욱 가까이 이뤄낼 수 있다고 확신합니다.
I'm firmly convinced that if we, including China, Japan, Russia, and North Korea and other countries in Northeast Asia, put our heads together and work together, and we should be able to tackle the North Korean nuclear issue, and that will put us that much closer to the unification of the Korean Peninsula.
이번 원코리아 국제 포럼이 그 한반도는 물론 동북아 세계 평화의 진일보에 큰 역할을 또 계기가 될 것으로 확신합니다.
And I believe that this international forum on One Korea will be an opportunity for us to come up with the plans for co-security and co-prosperity of Northeast Asia and the global community.
트럼프 대통령이 지난번 국회에서 연설에서 이와 같은 말로 이와 같은 연설을 하셨습니다.
At the National Assembly of Korea, President Trump said this.
우리는 함께 하나의 한국 그리고 안전한 한반도 또 가족의 재회를 꿈꿉니다.
Together, we dream of a Korea that is free, a peninsula that is safe, and families that are reunited once again.
트럼프 대통령은 말미에 이런 말씀을 했습니다. 남북을 잇는 고속도로, 또 가족의 만남, 그리고 핵 암몽은 사라지고 아름다운 평화의 약속이 오는 날을 꿈꿉니다.
And toward the end of his speech, he also said that we dream of highways connecting north and south, of cousins embracing cousins, and this nuclear nightmare replaced with the beautiful promise of peace.
그것은 우리 모두의 꿈입니다.
That is the dream of all of us.
함께 그 꿈을 이뤄냅시다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. We should achieve that dream together. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sang-min Lee, for those thoughtful remarks and also reminding us that when we have a determination and commitment to a positive goal, our human creativity and initiative can solve even the most intractable problems. Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Korea Economic Institute of America, former Congressman Ronald Manzullo. For 20 years, Congressman Manzullo represented the 16th District of Illinois in the U.S. House of Representatives, serving on the Foreign Affairs, Financial Services, and Small Business Committees. During that time, he served as chairman of the House Small Business Committee and as the top Republican on the Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, including chairing the pivotal subcommittee during his last 2 years in the House. Mr. Manzullo also served on 2 other subcommittees dealing with international economic, trade, and monetary policy. He was a commissioner on the Congressional Executive Commission on China, which monitors China's human rights practices. He was a member of the House Task Force on the Hong Kong transition. He served as chairman of the Canada-U.S. Interparliamentary Group and the U.S.-China Interparliamentary Exchange. He was a participant in the U.S.-Japan-Korea, the U.S.-Mexican, and the U.S.-European interparliamentary exchanges. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Ronald Manzullo.
Well, thank you very much. I thank you for this opportunity to share with you some thoughts about the Republic of Korea and to say that unification is the inexorable and inevitable goal of the peninsula. I say inevitable to emphasize that unification is not an issue as to whether it will occur, but when and under what circumstances. A country involuntarily severed by World War II agreement among the victorious Allied powers still remains a country involuntarily severed. The passing of time does not make the artificial division of the Korean Peninsula any more natural or acceptable. The word unification, according to the English dictionary, says it is the process of being united or made into a whole. Reunification means back to the original state, place, or condition from a prior severance. The Korean Ministry of Unification, not reunification, recognizes this distinction. Unification means an ongoing process involving all the people of the Korean Peninsula, implying the people of Korea have never been separated in spirit, though in body, and the process of unification is connecting the body with the spirit. The goal of unification is simple: to recognize that which already exists and to work towards the process of the completion of Korea's national identity. And that's why unification is inevitable. The spirit is crying for its body, and the body is crying for its spirit, But unfortunately, many surveys, especially among the young, demonstrate lack of interest in unification. And that's why it's important to educate not only the people of the Republic of Korea on the inevitability of unification, but the world as a whole. When inevitability is assumed, the focus shifts, not from if, but when and how. You're not truly free if your brother is living in slavery. You're not truly satisfied if your brother is hungry. You're not fulfilled if your brother's life is counted as insignificant. Your body can never rest if it's separated from its spirit. Yet time in Korea, unfortunately, is working against unification. Time serves as another method to keep the body from full unity with the spirit. And that's why it's important to do what you're doing here today. South Koreans and the entire world, and the North Koreans, must be reminded of the need for unification in Korea. And the United States has a great interest in unification of the peninsula, witnessed by the blood of nearly 37,000 American soldiers, heroes, shed on such remote and obscure places as the Chosin Reservoir, Incheon, the Pusan Perimeter, Pork Chop Hill, Old Baldy, and Heartbreak Ridge. President Moon's national vision of the people, a Republic of Korea of justice, is based on reconciliation and cooperation, and amongst its steps has realizing the new economic map initiative and economic unification of the Korean spirit and spreading consensus in the peninsula as to the importance and inevitability of unification. Believing unification is inevitable makes the how a lot easier and does not place the emphasis on speculation of its occurrence, but in the manner of implementing it. Freedom and disappearance and the abuse of human rights will foster when we see unification. Mitigation of work shortages, so South Korea no longer has to import workers from Southeast Asia. Huge gains in the mining sector, as North Korea has valuable minerals, including the rare earth minerals used in the highest of technologies. And the United Korea, with a newly expanded domestic market and an increase in tourism. The DMZ would be gone, trade would get easier, a unified Korea could emerge as a consuming industrial powerhouse. This will not be easy. It will be very difficult. But let me ask you a question. When have the South Koreans ever backed away from a challenge? Did they back away from refusing to surrender their identity during the Japanese occupation? Did they back away from the invasion of the North, fighting nearly to the end until the Americans and others came? Did they back away from the outlandish dream of becoming a world power and leader in manufacturing when they had few minerals and little history of manufacturing? Did they back away from the ambitious statement that South Korea could build ships when Chung Jung-yoon, with no shipbuilding experience, no shipyard, no money, convinced investors to order a ship from him? And when asked if Koreans had experience building ships, he reminded the investors that Admiral Yi Sun-shin built a turtle ship, the world's first ironclad ship, and sank the Japanese fleet just a few years earlier in 1597. Did the South Koreans really think that their Did the South Koreans really think that their war-ravaged country, in rubbles at the end of the Korean conflict, how did Korea become one of the largest exporters of machine tools in the world? How did Korea become a world leader in manufacturing of semiconductors? How did Korea become one of the largest shipbuilders? How did Korea capture a significant portion of America's domestic auto market? How did Korea become the world's 12th largest economy? It's because Koreans have always met their vision, no matter how hard the task. And there are all kinds of theories and proposals to unification, but perhaps the real solution, the real vision, has yet to be discovered. In 1987, the Estonians started singing their national anthem at an annual music festival. leading to the August 23, 1989 miracle of 700,000 Estonians, 1/4 of the population, joining 500,000 Latvians and 1 million Lithuanians, all joining hands and singing their way to freedom from Soviet control. Singing their way to freedom. In the same year, hundreds of thousands of Czechoslovakians stood in Wenceslas Square. I was there a couple of years ago. And they did this. They shook their keys as a symbol that these keys unlocked the door of freedom. And the Soviets backed down, and they elected not a military leader or a politician who emerged as the leader of a free Czechoslovakian, but a poet in the Velvet Revolution. And Koreans saw in the Candlelight Revolution of 1 million or more South Koreans in the square with the babies in the carriages holding up candles, saying we want to bring an end to the present regime and bring about honesty again in government. And Korea's documents witnessed the inevitable and inexorable unification. The March 1st, 1989 Declaration of Independence was signed by 33 national representatives, all of whom were leaders from various religious faiths. Some important assertions occur in that declaration. Quote, "We hereby declare Korea as an independent state and its people as free. If we are to wash off yesterday's rancor, if we are to shed today's agony, if we are to abolish tomorrow's menace, if we are to eagerly broaden our shrunken national conscience and state pride, if we are to achieve natural development of individual character, and if we are to keep our poor children from inheriting anguish and shame, if we are to bestow everlasting blessing on our descendants, then our first duty is to secure the independence of our nation. Korean independence will be a step toward the stability of East Asia, as well as a part of world peace and human happiness. A new spring has come," the declaration goes on, "hastening the rebirth of every living thing. While we held our breath in the ice and snow, our pulse now stirs in the warm breeze and sunshine. The fortunes of heaven and earth have returned to us, and we ride the changing tides of the world. We hereby rise up. To begin is to be successful. We only need to march in the light." And that declaration is assumed in the rugged independence and unity of the peninsula, carried on in the Constitution of the Republic of Korea. Quote, "Having assumed the mission of democratic reform and peaceful unification of our homeland, and having determined to consolidate national unity with justice, humanitarianism, and brotherly love, the territory of the Republic of Korea shall consist of the Korean Peninsula and its adjacent islands. The Republic of Korea shall seek unification and shall formulate and carry out a policy of peaceful unification based on the principles of freedom and democracy." Children sing their national anthem frequently, stating the hope of unification. The third verse reads as follows: "Autumn sky is void and vast, high and cloudless. The bright moon is our heart, undivided and true. The refrain expresses how it will be done. 3,000 we of splendid rivers and mountains, filled with roses of Sharon, great Korean people, stay true to the great Korean way." The great Korean way is that Koreans don't know the meaning of the word no. It is not in their vocabulary. Former Ambassador On tells the story of talking to 3 students, and he asked this question: how is it that Korean students excel in academics? And one student said, perhaps it's because we were taught by our parents. The second student said, well, perhaps we have learned that the road to success depends on our excellence in studies. And the third Korean child said, Mr. Ambassador, perhaps it's simply because we are Koreans. Korea, one peninsula, one people, one country, and one destiny.
Congressman Manzullo, thank you so much for those inspired words and passionate expression to the people here. Let's give Congressman Manzullo another round of applause. One thing he said stood out to me that I think summarizes a lot of what he said. Koreans have always met their vision, no matter how hard the task. And thus, the setting of the vision and the deciding and determining to accomplish that is something, what his message conveyed is that the Korean people have always met their goal and their vision, envisioning, understanding, determining, claiming unification, peaceful unification is achievable for the Korean people and for the world community. Our final speaker, we now will have our final presentation, and I do want to mention that we'll extend a little bit, and we will certainly give her full time. So I just want to I'm sure that we all want to spend a little more time here in our session, because this is a very, very important conclusion of the discussions that we've been having. And we're very, very honored to have with us here this afternoon Dr. Sumi Terry. She is Senior Fellow for Korea at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Prior to joining CIS, which was just very recently, she had a long and distinguished career in intelligence, policymaking, and academia following Korean issues. She served as Senior Analyst on Korea issues at the CIA from 2001 to 2008. Following that, Dr. Terry was the Director for Korea, Japan, and Oceanic Affairs at the National Security Council, under both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. In that role, she formulated, coordinated, and implemented U.S. government policy on Korea, Japan, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and Oceania. Since leaving the government, she has been a senior research scholar at Columbia University's Weatherhood East Asia Institute and senior advisor for Korea at Bauer Group Asia. With her wealth of research, policy making, and government service, Dr. Terry is uniquely positioned to speak on these critical issues. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sumi Terry.
Good afternoon. That's a hard act to follow. That was really inspired speech. Let me first begin by thanking the Global Peace Foundation, Action for Korea United, EastWest Institute, One Korea Foundation, and the forum's partners for inviting me here today to participate in this very important discussion on One Korea. One Korea, whole and free, is an issue that I feel very passionate about, and I could not be more honored to be here, to be the last speaker to conclude this forum. Since the early 1990s, when the North Korean nuclear crisis really began in earnest, the primary objective for US's North Korea policy has been very simple: get Pyongyang to give up its nuclear program to remove the immediate threat. But I truly believe this approach to the North Korean problem, making it all about North Korea's nuclear program, has been myopic and ineffective. Having followed closely the North Korean issue my whole entire career, I'm pretty convinced that the North Korean regime is never going to transform itself into a country that its citizens or its neighbors can live with. Since coming into power in December 2011, Kim Jong-un, the current leader, has been speeding towards completing North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities that his father and grandfather have pursued at cost of billions of dollars and millions of lives. And I believe he's unlikely to give up the nuclear program or give it up until he achieves the capability to attack mainland United States with a nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missile. I mean, think about this. In 6 years in power, Kim Jong-un has conducted 4 nuclear tests and 90 ballistic missile tests. That's double the number that his father and grandfather have tested combined. Meanwhile, the North Korean regime is and will continue to be the worst human rights violators and weapons proliferators on this planet. So in the long run, I truly believe there's only going to be one happy ending to this long-running saga with North Korea, and that is unification of the Korean Peninsula. This is why I believe while we continue to ratchet up pressure against the Kim regime by sanctions and other means, our long-term policy and goal should be promoting Korean-led peaceful unification of the Koreas. In fact, all of us really have a stake in doing this, what we can to promote this eventual outcome. And this will not only bring benefit to Korea, but also to the region and to the world from security, economic, and human rights perspective. To some degree, I think the measures we are pursuing, currently pursuing, strengthening sanctions and other pressure measures, such as transmitting information into North Korea or highlighting North Korean regime's human rights abuses, or help towards the unification efforts. The more we intensify economic pressure against the Kim regime, for example, the more we shake the confidence of the elites and threaten to stir discontent among the very people that Kim relies on for support. The more we enforce sanctions and cut off the money, the more Kim Jong-un will be left vulnerable because he will have less foreign currency to underwrite the lifestyles of the elites, and the elite support is essential for Kim to maintain his grip on power. And the more we get information into North Korea from the outside world and break Kim Jong-un's information blockade, the more we are able to help build a foundation for eventual unification. And as part of this effort, we may want to think about directing information operation campaign on unification to North Korea. I think this will be particularly important for the North Korean elites who are likely to oppose unification in serious ways. At the time of German unification, the German Ostpolitik, which is Eastern policy, contributed significantly to rapprochement between East and Western Germany, especially at the societal level. Most East Germans appealed to feel that unification would personally be good for them. They viewed West Germany as more economically advanced and rich, thus anticipated that unification would give them a better economic life. So building positive North Korean post-unification policy or quality of life expectations for the public and even possibly the elites and the military, and getting that message into North Korea would be, I think, very beneficial. At the same time, I think we need to also step up our efforts to highlight North Korea's gulag and other systemic and widespread human rights violations, which the UN Commission of Inquiry in its landmark 400-page report called it crimes against humanity. Like apartheid South Africa, North Korea is a moral abomination. North Korea is one of the most repressive places on the planet. North Korean human rights abuses constitute a core threat, not just to the people of the North, but also to the region's stability and prosperity. And I believe this threat is as grave as the one that's posed by the regime's nuclear weapons program. I think the next important step we need to take is to augment current military joint planning that is there between U.S. and South Korea with a detailed and coordinated political, diplomatic, economic, cultural, educational, public relations, and legal strategy to tackle core unification issues that are likely to arise. But beyond the U.S.-South Korea alliance and moving beyond the Cold War beyond the confines of the Cold War framework. We also need to begin undertaking a diplomatic effort or diplomatic offensive to gain or to secure regional and global cooperation to support Korean-led unification. This effort would involve promoting United Korea's vision and benefits to the government and people of the neighboring countries and key stakeholders, Washington, China, Japan, Russia, and to that end, various channels of intergovernmental, public and private diplomacy and civil society engagement, I think, should be utilized. And to win support from the neighboring countries, the Korean-led unification vision should not be just a mere declaration, but the neighboring countries should be able to see sufficiently, or they should be sufficiently convinced that the vision is associated with commitment and workability. So, for example, to deal with China's concerns, South Korea could explain to Beijing its plans for unification and what unified Korea's policy might look like, a triangulated policy balancing US and China and contributing to sort of a win-win for peace in the region. Japan, too. Japan might look askance at the prospect of unification on the Korean Peninsula, but the Korean Peninsula presents a unique opportunity for Japan. Japan could make important non-military contributions like development, aid, and assistance. And Japanese generosity at such a momentous time in Korean history could help repair the still very fragile relationship between the two countries. The significance of unification diplomacy is already proven by the so-called 2+4 diplomacy, by which Germany secured cooperation of the United States, of the United Kingdom, France, and Soviet Union based on the Germany's unification negotiation. And while Korean-led unification should be supported by regional powers, earning global support for unification is also important. This effort will not only require increased cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan, but from the broader Asian community, such as Mongolia and India, and even other key middle powers, such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and Australia. And to this effort, expanding public diplomacy towards citizens of international community by building complex network of political circles, media, academics, and civic groups would be helpful. And thanks to advance in media and the internet, public opinion does have a great influence on international issues, and people could unite globally. And I'm thinking, as an example, South Africa and the whole apartheid situation there. But beyond these efforts, the ultimate challenge might be, as Mr. Manzullo talked about, not only earning regional and global support for unification, but also convincing South Korea's own population of the wisdom of pursuing unification and building consensus over time. And to this end, I think all of you, and particularly our South Korean delegation, could assist in the efforts of persuading the public, your own public, that unified Korea is an investment in the future of the Korean people, something that would benefit the children of those having to pay the cost in the short run. So I don't also mean to suggest that unification would be problem-free. I'll be the first to admit, and I studied this issue for many years in the intelligence community, I'll be the first to admit that there will be likely many-fold problems that unification could bring, particularly in the short run. Even under the best of circumstances, unification of South and North Korea will be more expensive and more challenging than unification of East and West Germany, because the two Koreas are further apart in technology, economies, ideology, and education. But assuming that we handle unification the right way, there is a potential for very happy outcome here. One Korea, whole and free. Just imagine the benefits of freeing 25 million people from the grip of the world's last remaining Stalinist dictatorship. Average North Koreans could move from starvation diet, both literally and intellectually, to the plentiful availability of food, information, consumer products, and all other benefits of modern capitalism. The majority of North Korea's 80,000 to 120,000 political prisoners could leave the government slave labor camps, where most have been consigned there as for political rather than criminal offenses. In one fell swoop, you would eliminate the biggest source of instability in Northeast Asia, including worries about North Korea selling nuclear weapons abroad. A unified Korea would be essentially a bigger version of South Korea, just as free and even more prosperous. A democratic country with 75 million hardworking people. And the new Korea could emerge as a Germany of Asia, a new economic powerhouse and force for stability in the region. The two Koreas have been one people, one nation since the Silla Kingdom, one of the three kingdoms, have unified nearly all of the Korean peninsula in 668 AD. For almost all of its history, there has been a strong sense of unity within the Korean historical experience. One race, one language, one culture. This is what makes the current division of the Korean peninsula into two halves more tragic and an astonishing anomaly in world history. It's a partition that makes far less sense than the division of Germany since World War II, since Germany, after all, was only formed as a unified state in 1871. There is much to be gained from unification of the Korean Peninsula, and this is what you spent last 2 days talking about. So I believe my conclusion is we must confront the prospect of unification with confidence, not trepidation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Sumi. Terry, let's give her one more round of applause. Appreciate very much that as we've been discussing over the last 2 days, this challenge that is facing our world today, posed by the nuclear threat and other issues on the Korean Peninsula, is a very serious, a dire threat and concern that requires our immediate and concerted attention. We've also been discussing that the solution is something that is not only one that can be achieved top down, but also must come from bottom up, from citizens, from people, starting with the Korean people, but also extending to the world community to address this critical matter. We're also reminded by our speakers this afternoon that the power of the human spirit to address even the most insurmountable odds is something that we know and is capable of marshaling, and that now is the time to do that. Yesterday we had very, very important interventions and contributions. We heard about an understanding from Dr. Parker that this challenge on the Korean Peninsula is a significant opportunity. We heard from the GPF founder, Dr. Hyun Moon, about clear action steps and a vision and a roadmap, really, over the next couple of years for significantly bringing together the world community to address this most important vision and dream. So as we conclude here, we're not simply concluding an experts discussion here, a policy discussion, but we're citizens of our world coming together to address a problem and take action. And so for our final conclusion here, I'd like to invite up Dr. Hyun Preston Moon to give us a concluding word and way forward, especially as we go from here. We're convening the second part of this forum on December 7 and 8 in Seoul, Korea. Please welcome Dr. Hyun P. Moon.
First of all, let's give another round of applause to the panel here and their passion and their amazing speeches. So I just would like to conclude by kind of wrapping up in terms of some of the themes that I've heard throughout the course of this forum. A forum series that we intend to continue this dialogue so that more and more individuals like yourselves, as well as others, could be participating in this process to bring about the unification of North and South Korea. I think the first theme is that we are at a historic opportunity. This challenge had been thrust upon the Korean people ever since the partitioning of the Korean homeland after liberation from Japan. I think I mentioned in my speech the failures even within U.S. policy, but also the entire global community, and that a tragedy was sought when that partition happened, because it basically separated a homogeneous people that had a common identity, culture, history that spanned 5 millennia. In one sense, we're a historic milestone in that history has come full circle. As someone whose family was directly involved in architecting the 1919 Declaration for Independence that our congressman read so eloquently, and as a family that had been involved in the pursuit for the unification of the two Koreas for as long as I could remember, this is something that is made even that much more bittersweet for me. In that in 2019, we're going to be celebrating the 100th year centennial of the 1919 independence movement. Why is this significant and why is this important? Because it captured the unadulterated dreams of the Korean people that was seeking liberation from Japanese colonial yoke and wanted to create a new republic that basically manifested the aspirations of Koreans from its founding, inspired by an ideal of 홍익인간, a belief that God had mandated to the Korean people to live for the benefit of all mankind. So I talk about this in my book, that throughout Korean history, this ideal informed the Korean people, developing a rich spiritual consciousness that allowed them to formulate and strengthen their sense of national identity and destiny. And that it was manifested in the 20th century in the liberation movement. And that is why 1919, March 1st, is so significant to the Korean people. Now, as Americans or as Westerners, you might not understand the rich history of Korea, but Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, was part of the independence movement. I touch upon in my book, I talk about how Koreans seeking independence, they looked to different sponsors. So you had Koreans that looked to the United States as a sponsor, you had Koreans that looked to European nations as sponsors, and you had Koreans that looked to the Soviet Empire as sponsors. But their goal was to build a unified homeland that manifested the ideals upon which the Korean national identity was built. So if you look at North Korea still believes, or one of the key elements of the Juche ideology is that the Kim family goes all the way back, historically, to the founding mythology of Korea. Same thing in South Korea. The founding kind of philosophy of South Korea is the 홍익인간 idea. So this ideal is really the only unifying ideal that both North Korea and South Korea agrees on. One of the reasons why the book that I wrote in 2014 is so influential in Korea is that it it articulated what that dream is in a way that Koreans resonate with. So, before the writing of that book, remember, there was no terminology coined the Korean dream. This became the Korean dream. And I think one of the things that many of you gathered here, if you have read the book or if you have not read the book, I'd like to explain. It comes from hard-won lessons. You know, my father opened the door to North Korea in 1991 with that historic meeting with Kim Il-sung. There, it was from that point that the North started to engage the South, and that eventually, several years later, that South Korea and North Korea developed the Sunshine Policy. Now, the Sunshine Policy was, in one sense, for somebody who had been involved in the unification issue most of my life, was a tremendous, tremendous, hopeful achievement. However, when we look back in retrospect, it was a complete and utter failure. And the question is why? The reason why the Sunshine Policy failed was because the South, in terms of engaging the North, had no clear endgame plan. They had no strategy. They talked about dialogue. They talked about talking with the North, engaging with the North, and somehow by osmosis, by sunshine, that the North will collapse or will fold or will cooperate in some type of unified Korea. Well, the naivete of that is what really informed not only the writing of my book, The Korean Dream, but also the initiative called AKU. Now, I know that, especially I remember 2010, when I really started this movement for unification, I remember I had to do a lot of convincing to Koreans who believe that the only way that you're going to solve the unification process is basically dialogue between the two Koreas, meaning the two governments of Korea. I don't know how many times I explained to them, no. What's more important is actually a citizen-led grassroots movement that moves the governments of these two Koreas, that brings about the transformation of this peninsula to become a unified nation. We have to have a clear vision and dream that inspires all of us. At the same time, we need to develop a grassroots movement of citizen-led, average Koreans that pushes this process of unification forward. That became the epiphany behind the founding of Action for Korea United. Now, when I started that initiative in 2012, once again I was told it can't happen. Not in Korea, not in South Korea, because of the hyper-partisan politics and because of the innate class divide due to the archaic chaebol economic system. So most Koreans don't feel, although it is so-called a capitalist country, they do not feel opportunity. And it's because there's major structural problems within the Korean economy that does not allow average Koreans to participate in capital creation. That's another side story. But the key issue was, could a citizen-led grassroots movement exist in South Korea? Well, I think we made history. Because 5 years later, as we stand today, it is the largest coalition of religious, civic, NGOs, as well as the Korean government in Korea. And this is the first time in the history of modern Korea that such a coalition was ever created. Then I was told, there is a lot of young people who are going to be the future of Korea that does not want unification to happen because they think it's going to be too expensive. All these different reasons. Well, so in 2015, we launched the 1K concert where we partnered with K-pop. Can you believe it? K-pop? We partnered with K-pop and the icons in the K-pop industry in the entertainment field to partner with us to educate the Korean young people about the importance and the relevance of unification for them and their future. Now, at that time, the big problem within the Korean economy right now is that there are so many educated, college-educated young people who cannot find a job. So among that demographic group, many of them were talking about hell choson, that South Korea is like hell. As our analyst pointed out, unification will be the economic stimulus, not only of Korea, but the entire region. It will afford the opportunities that currently the South Korean economic system does not afford its young people. So, as I started to talk to these entertainment people in terms of the relevance of unification, they got it. Doesn't take that long, they get it. And from that point on, all the top K-pop groups, I can't name them, it's not my generation, but my children can, and probably your children can. All of them came on board. And the most famous producer and songwriter in Korea, he actually wrote the first unification theme song that is now, we created a whole new genre of songs in Korea, unification songs, and it was started from this 2015 event. Fast forward to 2017, in spring, when we had, once again, that concert in the Philippines. I was told that unification issue is not relevant beyond Korea. Well, we had the 1K concert in the Philippines. And there, 15,000 Filipino youth came to the Araneta Stadium, and they basically were chanting, "One Korea, the one dream, one Korea, one world," with the handful of Korean kids that flew from Korea to see this K-pop concert. It was televised by KBS to the Korean audience, as well as the global Korean audience through KBS International. But the thing that was most significant was that the Filipino youth identified with the cause of Korean unification. And this is significant. Our analyst here was talking about apartheid and how that became an international event that the world community had to condemn. Well, through events such as this, we found that yes, the human rights violations and the fact that the Korean people are united today is an issue that the global community can rally behind. And once you create that global consensus, and once you have the global community recognize that this is an issue that has to be resolved, then unification will come. That is why what happened recently with Trump's visit, with President Trump's visit to Asia, is so significant. Because it represents a departure, and this is especially to the Korean audience here. This is a significant departure in terms of American foreign policy towards Korea. If our Korean guests think that America's positioning is like it was a year ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, vis-a-vis the Korean Peninsula, they need to rethink that. The calculus has completely changed with North Korea's nuclear program and their effort to have an ICBM that could hit the United States. As far as Americans concerned, this is a major issue that they have to resolve. So Trump's speech in front of the national parliament in Korea was significant in that for the first time in the history of Korea, The Korean issue is front and center in terms of American foreign policy. Up until now, Korea was always an afterthought. But now, as far as America's concerned, as far as the global community is concerned, the Korea issue is front and center. Not only in terms of American foreign policy, but in terms of global security. So we have entered a period in time which is, I have to end this soon. So anyway, we have entered a time in which we have almost entered a perfect storm that something amazing can happen if truly the message gets out of the importance of unification. So I want to thank all of you for your participation, and I hope that you can join us in this cause for the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moon. Let's have one more round of applause for our panelists today. Thank you very much. Congressman Manzullo, Dr. Sumi Terry, Honorable Park, and Honorable Lee. And we thank you very much for joining. There are several other events taking place soon. We invite you to join the Faith in Action Roundtable starting at 3 p.m., the UPI Forum at 3 p.m., and the Congressional Parliament Roundtable leaving very soon. Thank you very much.